Hi, I'm the True Wise Gamer, giving out my vast knowledge so you may understand games a bit better. So, what is this mess? Well, apparently, Square Enix at the time was shopping out the series for everyone else to try out and see what they could make. And at one point they decided Koei Tecmo would be best to try it out, probably for the cheap. One of the games they helped made was Dissidia NT, which in my opinion is kind of bad, mostly due to because of the changing of the nature of the gameplay being from an arena fighter, which also had a strong single player mode, and was pretty good overall, minus some issues that should have been handled. We may talk about that game some other day. Instead made it into a multiplayer-centric free versus free arena fighter that actually hurt it way more because there's not a lot else to do other than that, and it became dumbing down of the original mechanics the original game had. We could talk about that game a lot, but just to note, it did have some nice additions, and some ideas weren't entirely bad. In fact, we'll need to kind of circle around to this game again, because ironically, it's important. And in all fairness, it's not bad per se, but I just hate it because it's a lesser experience than the PSP games, which is kind of sad in all honesty. I actually got a copy of the game again, well, Dissidia, from a friend of mine. Thanks again, Sober. It's just fun. I just love playing it. But in any case, back on topic. After that, they decided to make, well, Strangers of Paradise. And it was done by the same people who did the Neo game, which are pretty decent. Not my thing all that much, but it's still good. And quite honestly, sadly, it didn't do critically all that well. And it's really deserved that the game is overall just bad. Not without merit, but still. I mean, the game was not helped with the trailer, which gave up the wrong impression of the game, giving people the idea that it's less than what it's trying to be, if that makes sense. We'll dive into that more later, because I need to talk about a lot of other things around it, so it's better off to talk about it when it's more apparent, which we will dive into as we begin the review for Strangers of Paradise. The game begins with a dark scene of a castle as we see Garland? What the hell? Well, yeah, here's where we need to explain the big thing about Strangers of Paradise. It tries to be one of those prequel to classic games, which, let's be honest here, can end terribly or be pretty dang good. Sadly, it won't be and will just be more of the former. In any case, after the scene, the game has us with our main protagonist, Jack, in a field of flowers or wheat. I think it's just wheat. I've never seen wheat. Anyway, as he's listening to Frank Sinatra, My Way, for some reason. It makes sense later, sorta, kinda, not really to me because I'll talk about it later because it makes sense when I'm talking about it with more context. Just note, I'm not particularly a fan. Well, I sort of lied about this scene too. There was actually a sort of spoilerly scene that doesn't make any amount of sense, but just note it's not important. In any case, the game truly begins as we meet Jack and his friends? Allies? No, allies too soon. Comrades? No, that's even too soon. Guys he journeys with. Why did I say that? Well, simply put, they aren't really friends at best. They're mostly allies in battle. Any other situation, they're just together. The reason I say this is mostly because I'm getting a little ahead of myself. We'll dive into this more later. Jack is just an unlikable asshole who I have no, and I mean genuinely no, care for. I honestly feel like he has no redeeming traits, and the only thing that makes him interesting is that he is Garland, which, by the way, the game spoils really early on. Well, I mean, the trailer spoiled really early on. In fact, to go on about this for a moment, everyone kind of thought the game was being cheesy and on the nose about what it's doing. It's in on the idea that, yeah, this story's stupid, don't worry about it. Because of certain scenes, like the whole chaos thing where chaos was said, literally every 10 seconds. Or at least said in no lesser intervals, and the whole vibe of I don't give a crap about what's going on. However, it sadly doesn't work for me because, well, here's the thing. This is all supposed to be important. Like, this is all just his character. He's just a serious asshole. And I sort of get the idea is because some people really hate how serious some RPG stories are. Which I'm like, I don't have time for your irony poison. I really hate the irony poison. I have been poisoned. I have immunity to that shit now. Because, unlike some of my contemporaries, which I should not name, I genuinely care about the story. And if it's being serious, I'll take it seriously. If it doesn't really care all that much, through the dialogue and certain ideas of which you can glean from, I will change my expectation as the story is being delivered. If the story is very clearly, or at least gives enough context clues to say, this is a story you should not take all that seriously, then fine, I won't. Like, I don't need to worry about a Mario game being all serious and whatnot. We get the gist of what's gonna happen. It's a very clear-cut journey. Don't get mad at the story that's trying to be genuine, is all I'm saying. Because for all the crap I'm gonna give this game, I'll always treat it with some level of respect, because it was genuine. It wanted to tell a story, even if it's garbage. I'm sorry for kind of going on that side note, it's just, trying to actually explain this story is annoying, and when I tried to get the Reddit to try to tell me what the story was, so I wasn't making some mistake, I really didn't get any answers. No one really cared about the plot all that much. I mean, like, some said that that's probably what happened, and I'm like, ugh. Which is kind of ironic, because I said it cared about its plot, which it sort of doesn't. It's complicated. Like, remember when I stated when I was trying to, like, figure out what the story was so I didn't have to make any addendums saying, like, oh, I misunderstood this scene? Well, no. I clearly really did not get this story on a first-time playthrough because, legitimately, it's really confusing because the game doesn't want to explain anything. Like, when I say I understood Final Fantasy XIII more than this, that's terrifying to me because I'm not even sure how the hell I understood that game more than this. And this is also very weird when the game was written by Kazushige Nojima. I hope I got that name right. First time through. If so, yes. If not, dang. For those who don't know who that is, basically he's been around Square Enix for a real long time, having directed Bahamut's Lagoon, which I've been told is really, really great. I've never played it and honestly should really play one day. In any case, he's mostly a writer who helps and assists the main team with side material and just helping with the development of other games. For example, he actually wrote a lot of stuff for Final Fantasy VII, with the books and some expansion material like this anime here. Which are, by the way, canon because of this guy right here, which he was in one of the books, and I know that's weird to like reference him, but I'm just trying to give you an example of how important he is. I also know he wrote for Mobius. Wow, no one? Okay, fair enough. I know nobody cared about it like I do, because I played this thing when I was younger, when it first came out. However, I also found out he wrote for Final Fantasy XV, which, while I enjoy, is a very flawed, very flawed story. So that could be just due to because of the development of 15. He also wrote the mythos for Final Fantasy 13. However, sadly, he also wrote 10.2.5. Which, for those who don't know, 10.2.5 is basically a betrayal of everything Final Fantasy X was all about. I mean, I'm just telling you right now, do not read it. It legit angers me that that book was ever written, and we're expecting a sequel someday. I'm not sure when, and I hope the day it never comes. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to explain who wrote it, and just show off that while he is a bad writer at times, it's not like he's that bad. In any case, after meeting... I literally forgot their names, holy shit. Jed and Ash. I don't know who's who. We'll come back to that. After meeting up with the king and basically saying, hey, we want to fight chaos, he basically sends them off on a mission to kill some monsters. Why, I'm not entirely sure. But after their small journey, they are allowed to attack the Chaos Shrine, where they think chaos is. And after a bit of exploring, they find Garland? What the hell is going on? Okay, strap in, folks, cause we haven't even begun the nonsense yet. After beating him, the armor soon fades away as we find a woman in a sailor outfit. Actually, what is with their normal outfits for a moment? It feels so out of places, like, why would their boss send them in that and allow them to bring tech? It's just so confusing to me. So now they want an explanation, and the explanation is really stupid. So this is Neon, who is from this world and is also a warrior of light, which you are technically also, but the game kinda is a little weird about this. I'll explain it later after we talk about the combat, but just for now, you're the warriors of light. So before their journey began, she was with some other folks trying to find Chaos to destroy him. However, for whatever reason, they couldn't find it. And at the end of their journey, well, the rest of them died. And Neon just prayed to Chaos to become Chaos so someone could defeat Chaos. That is apparently the actual connotation, but who knows at this point. And after that, the game kind of goes on this weird tangent for a moment that chaos isn't real, probably made up to explain why the world is so shitty. And like, I'm not even leaving much out, that's what happened. They just say, yeah, chaos isn't real. And then Jack goes, bullshit, and leaves to find chaos, which the others follow because what else are they gonna do? However, the king then goes on to just say, well, find the crystals, give them back their light so they can fix the world or something. That's also what we're supposed to do too. And that's like really the plot for the good time. Trying to find the crystals and just relight them. And while it gets more complicated than that, it's really not. Honestly, at this point, I don't want to talk about the plot right now, so let's actually talk about the combat. Really, one of the only redeemable aspects of this game. Well, sort of. So combat is really simple. It's sort of like Nioh, which is actually what the developers were making before making this game. In fact, if anything, this is just Nioh Final Fantasy Edition. Well, sort of. It has a lot of the same blood in it, but you can tell where the divergences happen. Ironically, there's a lot of blood in this game. It's not important, I just wanted to mention it, like, huh. The differences do, however, make it interesting, so let's dive into the biggest difference so far, that being the jobs. Like Final Fantasy V, which is stated to be the reference for the job system in this game, Jack is able to access into any job he wants, and can switch up to another job in mid-battle, which can allow for a lot of interesting combos. Well, I say can, but we'll get into that in a moment. That also means you're allowed to use a lot of weapons that do play different from one another, so there's a lot of variety there too. However, certain jobs have preferences to certain weapons, even if it makes no sense, like a monk can use a spear. I'm not sure why, but whatever. In any case, personally my favorite jobs were Monk, Breaker, and Sage. Basically due to because of their abilities were so useful, I would always use them all the time. In fact, that's what I did for a good chunk of the game. More on that in a bit. Essentially, their abilities were very good, and so I just used them a lot. Yeah, jobs have unique abilities between each other, so basically there's a reason why you would want to use one job over the other. However, it does create problems. You see, except for the ability, there aren't really any difference between one job and another. Like, the only real difference between a monk and a pugilist is that one has higher stats. Though to be fair, some basic jobs are better, like the lancer has the ability to hurl their weapon, while a dragoon can only jump. Which isn't bad, but hurling your weapons at a distance is always more useful than getting up close to them. But therein lies my problem. Jobs only have that one ability, so they become kind of like something you wear. And the only reason why you'll ever increase a job level is only because why not, and so you can unlock more jobs in general. That's pretty much it. And even then, a basic job is more than enough to finish the game outright. That's mostly because of a weird thing about this game in general. See, Neo, and by extension, this game, fall under that sort of category people like to call Souls-like, where they're very difficult and the layer design and all other things that I'm not going to get into. You kind of know when you see it. And the weird thing is about this game is that the game's really easy, like fairly easy for the most part. Like, the only hard part about this game are the bosses, which we will need to talk about in a separate moment, and I again have to apologize where I keep doing this thing where I say I'll talk about it later. Trust me, at this point I made a point about making sure that it has a reason. I promise you, there's a reason. And you'll also notice we actually haven't talked about the main mechanics of combat. That was on purpose. Well, simply put, it's a button masher, with the R1 being your attack button and the R2 being your special attack, or how you use your abilities, that can actually change depending on your combo. Problem is, I rarely cared about it. Like, there is a whole guard canceling combo in this game, and it's like, which canceling is a thing in this game you can do, and it's fine enough, I guess. I just never needed to learn it. Nor do I think the game teaches it all that well. I mean, like, it sort of does, but not really. Heck, you even have two guards, a normal guard and a soul shield. Basically, we need to talk about another thing, that being the break gauge. When your opponent's break gauge is broken, either doing enough damage or hitting their weakness, which is a thing in this game, you basically kind of stun them for a moment so you can then insta-kill them. Which also has a cool animation, like, if anything, I like these. These are kind of like very well of showing Jack's character as just a guy who's all about beating the crap out of things. And if you have multiple enemies around them that are also broke, you can actually break them all at once, doing a lot of things, though you gotta be careful about the game. We'll talk about that in the end. However, you need to be careful too because you have your own break gauge, and if it's broke, you basically take a lot more damage and are just stuck there. This is where Soul Shield comes in. Soul Shield basically trades in some break for a perfect barrier that, if timed right, can basically parry an enemy for a good amount of time to deal some damage. However, it basically made the normal shield useless. Plus, it has another useful ability. For every successful parry you do, you gain a bit of maxed MP, which is how you use your abilities. And breaking foes is a good way of getting max MP as well. If you're confused on why I mentioned it here, I just wanted to tie it here since we're talking about the same thing essentially. But, you know. At the end of the day, it does more than just normal blocking. And you can dodge out of attacks too, so again, there's not a lot of reasons why you should ever bother blocking when you can soul shield unless the enemy is able to use a very powerful attack, which will be annotated with a red mark. If they have a purple mark, on the other hand, your soul shield can actually absorb the attack and let you chuck it back at them, which is actually kind of a cool mechanic. So there's even more reason why you should never bother blocking. And this is where I need to talk about how I organize my review style. Basically, if I don't need to ever learn a certain mechanic, then I say there's a problem. And tying it back to what I said earlier about other combo moves that I didn't bother learning all that much, if you don't need them, why even bother? And even then, those cool moves I just referenced aren't even that useful to begin with because sometimes they could just leave you super open. So it's never really worth the risk in bosses. Yeah, this is a weird thing. Bosses are the only way the game's gonna really challenge you. And that's only because the main game is really easy. Yeah, once you got the basics down, the game doesn't really challenge you in any sort of way. I mean, the worst that can happen to you is a minor setback, due to how many checkpoints there are and just not a lot in between. The basic fodder are just basic. In fact, all of these enemies in this game are just mostly Final Fantasy 1 monster, except bosses and Ahriman. I'm actually very confused on why Ahriman's in here, though Cactuar and Toneberries are in this game too. In any case, it's just that the pool is so small is that after a while, foes will just repeat, except they're a little stronger. There's nothing really different between this goblin and that goblin, other than this goblin's slightly stronger. I mean, like, I don't think the game has to reuse enemies all the time, it's just that I would say around 2/5 of the game, you've probably seen every enemy in the game. And once you figured out how to beat them, it becomes more of a chore, if anything, to actually beat them. And just a side note, I played the game on hard. Both times. Because originally I played the game on a bit of normal, and I was like, okay, this isn't really challenging. So I bumped it up to hard. And really, while it is a little harder, but not by much. Heck, the minor setback is not even that much of a setback to begin with. See, in this game, there is nothing to be lost when you die, unlike other Souls games. The only thing you'll ever lose is your max MP, which you can gain back real easily, either by finding where you died again, or just regaining it naturally. And I mean, like, there's one change in this game that really makes this game a little different, and really explains to me why this game isn't really that hard. If you'll notice by now, I'm not alone in the game. That's mostly because the game gives you 2 allies to have in battle. While not good damage dealers, they're good distractions while you handle some enemies. Basically, they're a good way of handling certain foes on your own time, so basically you're not overwhelmed. I think their introduction to the game is kind of a problem because basically it also means that, like I stated earlier, you aren't overwhelmed and having to deal with a lot. So basically, they are a safeguard to a safeguard. Plus, with how the level designs are, there's not a lot of times where you'll fight more than like 2 to 3 enemies at best. And actually, speaking on the level designs, one of the things I like to do when writing a review is actually watch other people's reviews. Not to copy them, because let me just tell you, they're better than me in a lot of ways. I usually actually disagree with some of them, even the more popular ones. I mostly do it so that I can get a general idea of what people thought about certain things. You know what I mean? It's so that I don't say something erroneous and just flat out wrong. It makes sure that I'm checking my own work and making sure that, okay, I need to make sure I'm mentioning this. Or, like, I forgot to mention this. You know what I mean? This isn't normally how a lot of people think about games, and that's fine. I just have my own way of thinking about games. It just helps me realize that games have certain weird ideas around them. Like, for example, in a lot of the reviews I saw, they say they got lost. That is really confusing, like, how? One of the things about this game is that the levels are very straightforward. Sure, they might overlap, but there's only one way forward. There are like only 2 levels in my mind that are actually less than straightforward, which that being the Earth Shrine, and one other level that I can't even be bothered to remember. I think it was the Water Shrine, but that could just be memories messing with me. Probably is, but who knows. But in any case, those levels were the only ones that were less straightforward, but overall still had a straightforward path that you still need to follow in order to beat the level. And speaking on the levels, all the levels in this game are actually based on other Final Fantasy games. If you know, you know. If you catch my drift, like, it's not very subtle about the ones it's copying from if you pay attention to the hollow missives. Though really, it's more of a gimmick thing if anything, like, there's nothing really particularly different from one level to another. Like, the only real difference between them all is that there's a minor gimmick between them. And that can be mostly ignored. Most of the levels are actually quite small, like barely an hour if you're lucky. Which isn't wholly a problem because sometimes it's nice just to have a shorter level to let players feel like they're making progress, which is useful for players and keeping them engaged. However, it kinda causes a problem, well, it more like it compounds a minor problem, See, I haven't actually talked about the problem which exists, but it kind of doesn't exist unless somebody notices it for you or someone points it out to you. You see, we need to talk about the multiplayer. Yeah, that exists, and you're probably wondering, why am I talking about this? Well, simply put, I thought it would be interesting to talk about for a moment, and really, I did it by accident, which ironically led me to the actual problem with the game's core design. See, the multiplayer thing was again an accident. I didn't intend to, but I just said, why not? If somebody's gonna do it, might as well. And this is where I met Jimmy. Jimmy left me alone for a good chunk. It took me a while to realize what the hell he was actually doing. Basically, he wanted to get it done really fast, which basically made me realize that the levels are not designed well for players who are ignoring pretty much everything. Basically, there's nothing really stopping the player from going to wall and ignoring every enemy. See, enemies only have a limited aggro and certain areas are locked off between each other, which means they'll stop chasing you after a while. So it became this thing that made me realize, what is the point of fighting these enemies then? It kinda actually made me want to try a run where I just ignored most enemies, but I decided against it because might as well just show off everything. But the idea that I could do that kinda always stuck with me, which just made me realize, wait, what do foes do now when they can't actually stop me? You might say XP for the Jots, which, to note, I didn't explain it earlier, it doesn't really matter. We'll tie that up near the endgame stuff when I talk about it because that's where a lot of problems become way more apparent. And really, if you want to grind out some levels, just grind a boss. Doing half of their boss can give you a level for free every time, so there's literally not a lot of reason to do that. And thus, the only reason to fight enemies is to get new gear, which is really where the game begins to show its problems. Well, I mean, like, endgame shows all of its problems in its magnitude, but the gear system is where I really started to notice. You might have noticed that I never really talked about the gear system before until now, and you're confused on why. That's mostly because gear is leveled. That means that it scales depending on the area you're in. Basically, if you're dealing with a lot of level 30 enemies, they're gonna drop level 30 gear, so on and so forth. And let me tell you, if you're doing the game right, you're basically getting a lot of new gear all the time, meaning you're just replacing your old gear with the new gear, even if you don't like how it looks. Though they did add a setting where you could take off your face stuff, which is nice and stuff because it can mess with the cutscenes, which, by the way, it is actually kind of cool that they made sure that all the gear works and doesn't get in the way of all the costumes and whatnot. I know that's minor, but something to appreciate. And actually, speaking on the gear, it's mostly okay. It's not bad looking, like some of it is, but otherwise it's fine. However, I never cared about it because of, well, as I mentioned before, it's all level. So basically, I just began tossing out stuff left and right, basically because none of it really mattered. It kind of suffers from the Diablo problem, but instead it feels even more useless because you're getting so many of them in one level. It just becomes like noise in your ear. And really, you're not caring about what gear does to you in any sort of way or fashion. Like, most players are not going to care about the affinity. And I know like some players mention it, but here's the thing for me. I never once cared about affinity or any of the bonuses it ever gave. Because really, it all felt tacked on. Like, I didn't notice any difference between having high affinity for a thief than a monk. Side noting, affinity basically gives you more bonuses if you have a high enough stat with it. It's pointless. Like I stated, it's not really tangible and doesn't really feel all that meaningful. And really, it only ever starts to matter near endgame, which we now need to talk about the endgame. Endgame is the weirdest area of the game. So it basically essentially jacks up all the numbers of everything, but only you slightly. Note that last part, cause it scales massively. Even if you get the new level gear for an area, well, it won't matter that much unless you're at level 300, which even then, it might not have the proper stats to do the absolute best, since we sorta mention it. See, the game, as I mentioned, scales depending on the area. However, the scale is so whack that basically endgame becomes this sort of thing where you have a no-hit run. Which, let me tell you, some of these bosses are some bullshit, who can move really, really fast and are utter hell to play against. It just wasn't fun to do, and I just stopped playing in general. And really, all it is ever again is just replaying the levels again, just on a higher difficulty, with no real change into the gameplay. And the only reason why you'll ever do it is to get slightly better job points and abilities. That's really it. And I kinda want to side note for a moment, only because it's something I need to mention. Like, as much as I complained about it, it's not bad feeling. Like, in the moment of it all, it's fine. There's nothing particularly wrong with it. It's pretty quick and snappy so that you're not really feeling like you're wasting all that much time on it, and really, that's to the game's benefit because overall the game is short, but not like insultingly short, but designed to be short. And I mean, like, fighting foes isn't really boring, and it's fun to try to rush down all the foes in the game, trying to smash them down, and the animation for all the attacks are really well done, even if the game can barely handle it. This is where I need to talk about the graphics, and one of the things that genuinely pissed me off about all the reviews about this game is that a lot of them said it looked like a PS3 game. No, it doesn't. Like, how the hell did you get that idea to begin with? Because a lot of these people say they're fans of Neo, when it's just playing on Neo's engine. And side by side, you could tell they were using the same engine. However, I can agree it ran like a PS3 on consoles, and certain PCs, including my own. And yet, this thing had a hard time running it. That's mostly because the game is really unoptimized. And when they say it's unoptimized, I mean super unoptimized. It requires so much power to just show things that are just weird reasons why. You see, let's talk about models for a moment. No, not fashion models, the models in the game. Essentially, they're very complex. To put this in a way you can understand, you know Laphalos from Monster Hunter World? Well, to put this in a way, this bat actually takes up more space than that. Yeah. Which just means it eats up a lot of processing power just to render this most basic thing. Heck, there's a mod out there that helps the game run way better by making everyone bald, cause the fur textures in the game are not helping, and by turning it off, the game can run really smoothly. Yeah, it's that bad. Though to at least say it, like, I know a lot of people say it doesn't look good, it looks fine, man, it's not bad. And sometimes people are just over expecting games to just keep breaking the limit of texture quality and gameplay textures and whatnot. Like, can't we just have something that looks fine? This looks fine. Not everything needs to burn your graphic card. Okay? I mean, like, this will, but not for the right reason. And with that all said, that's the gameplay. Overall, while I enjoyed it, it's not good and really did need some rework. Honestly, I really wanted to like it. Like, at first I was enjoying it, but after a while, once I learned how shallow everything is, when the game was kind of giving off this vibe of, oh, it's actually a little more complicated than that, it just became like, I was just sold something I wasn't actually given. And now, we need to talk about the story, and oh god, I need to talk about how much I hate it. I want to begin by talking about Jack, and why he's the whole reason why I don't like the game's story all that much. In the beginning, I mentioned how much I thought Jack was an asshole. I didn't really get into it, and I don't want to mince my words here. I say this with impunity. I have no idea why anyone likes him. He's just an asshole. He has no characterization beyond, I want to kill Chaos. Which would have been fine if the story wasn't 20 hours long, and also, again, not making him an asshole. Or, well, not in this way, to be clear. He genuinely doesn't have anything beyond that, which would have been interesting if it moved past it, but he never does. Or at least I could have more tolerated him if the cast was more likable, which they are not. They are even less characters, to the point it's insulting to me to call them characters. Remember in the beginning where I also mentioned Jed and Ash? I literally forgot their names because I kept forgetting their names throughout the scripting of this. That is how much of a boring character they are. I don't even remember who's who. I mean, like, who the hell is Jed? Who the hell is Ash? Who is Neon? And who the fuck is Sophia? Oh, right, let me explain her. She's apparently another warrior of light who was transformed into Tiamat. Why? More on that in a bit, it's dumb. My point is, I have no desire to care about them because the game doesn't want to expand on them. Okay, I'm actually sort of lying. I actually do want to know more, but the game just does not care. The reason why I call Jack an asshole, it's when the other Warriors of Light begin to talk about their past and trying to remember stuff, Jack immediately kills that conversation dead and tells them to shut the fuck up, get back on target. And I remember this one scene because it pissed me off because all it did was do that again. Basically, Jed, yeah, now I actually remembered him. This guy wanted to talk and actually felt really concerned about wanting to say something very important. And then he just tells him to shut the fuck up and moves on. Or actually, I'm lying. He doesn't say anything and just moves past him, ignoring his so-called friend. And everyone just goes along with it. What is so interesting about him? All he reminds me of is Alex from Yeek. Like, I want to know, why do people find him so interesting? Some would say that it's basically because of his take no shit attitude. Well, that's funny in some regard. However, that causes the major issue with the plot and Jack. He is pretty much the sole reason why the story wants to do anything doesn't work. Because he doesn't care. So when the plot actually starts kicking up, it has failed to actually create any connection to us. And really, when I say the last few missions are the only one that actually matter, that's really all there is to it. The story just kind of pauses after you meet Sophia and just moves along until near the end, where it actually starts to do things which are dumb, but let's actually explain what's going on. The problem is with the plot is trying to explain it because there are just certain parts that aren't explained well, or just not even explained at all. That's mostly because they're included in the missives and the reports in the game. You know, that lore stuff that actually explains what's going on. And oh boy, you know I love that shit. So, let's actually explain the plot right now, and this is or at least what I understood to have happened. Okay, a while ago, not sure when because the game doesn't give an actual time frame. In fact, I'm not sure the game's time frame in general, other than something that will happen later. A race called the Lufinians basically tried to take over the world. Didn't work out, but suddenly they disappeared, maybe due to leaving themselves or something. It's never truly explained, but they just leave, and are able to leave their dimension. Because yeah, there are dimensions in this game. And while outside their home dimension, they meet a being whose name is hidden, but it is later to be confirmed to be Shinryu due to the nature of the being and other things that are explained. Some time passes, and they learn that their home world is basically teetering on the edge of destroying itself. So they decided to help it by placing crystals in the world to regulate the world. However, this begins to backfire on them when people realize the crystals that were helping them, they begin praying to them, which does help in some regard, but also messes with them by inflicting darkness into them, which can also mess with people and turn them into monsters. So Shinryu offered them a way to help them figure out a way to balance it. In exchange for the leftover energy, he would give them the ability to time travel. Yeah. We'll get back onto that. So yeah, they've been doing this for a while. But what are Jack and the others then? They are strangers. From where? I'm not sure. I legit don't know. My guess is that they are also Lufinians, but there's not a good explanation of this, like, at all. I mean, like, they have modern looking clothing, but Lufinians look like this, so who the hell knows? Strangers are then sent into the world to help restabilize and take away the darkness, or at least balance it in a way where the balance is kept in check. However, this doesn't always work, so there were a lot of resets. In order to clear away this darkness, they are given crystals, which were also given by Shinryu. However, they have weird properties to them that make them permanent even if a time loop occurs, so I'm not sure why, because it doesn't make any sense, but it doesn't really matter. However, to keep them in check, and I kind of forgot to mention this, I don't know why because it's sort of important but doesn't really matter all that much. The crystals are also where their memories are stored, so they have to be careful because in order to gain the powers of the crystal, they might either have to give up memories or the Lufinian take away their memories so that they don't interfere with their own mission, and if they need to do something to them, they're not gonna know. I'm not sure, it doesn't really matter all that much. After a lot, and I do mean a lot of this, they decided to say, fuck it and wipe everyone out because they're just tired of doing this. Which is just confusing as they say they're doing this for their future paradise, but aren't they already in their future paradise? Like, they're away out of anyone's control so they don't have to worry about anyone ever again. It's just confusing is all. So basically, their plan is, after defeating the Fiends, which is just like another confusing mess, we'll talk about that in a moment. Which is also confusing because of another thing, because what does it matter if the Fiends are there or not? Fill the world with darkness. They're not really gonna do anything. In any case, after everyone is turned into monsters, they just wipe out everyone and take it over. That's the idea, at least. Somehow, Jack figures this all out. Somehow, we legit don't know how the hell he learned this, or even how he could even come to realize it. His plan is to somehow basically defeat the Lufinians by basically making his friends kill themselves so they are stuck as a loop, and so that if they die, they will become ingrained in the universe, somehow due to them becoming a stain in the world, which I don't know, don't ask me, it's dumb. I swear on my life, why the fuck can't Square Enix understand that time travel doesn't work that way? And don't get me started on how the hell does Sophia and Neon even exist in this time loop when there are two other versions of them? Well, technically, Neon has two versions of herself in this timeline. Sophia already kinda died in... Look, I'm just saying this. It doesn't make any sense, and just roll with it. In any case, they are in this loop to help Jack so he can become Chaos. How? Well, by basically making him fall into this pit of despair, he can gather enough darkness to summon the actual Chaos. Also, Chaos is a real being who, after Jack kills, he is able to absorb into himself in order to take the time control device, his semi-revenge plan to basically purify this world by fulfilling the prophecy of the Warriors of Light, which basically they come to this understanding that if chaos can exist, so must the Warriors of Light. That's my guess. And that was my understanding of the entirety of this plot. And for the record, I repeat again, I had to ask the Reddit about this plot, and they said, Probably, because they all added the caveat of they're not sure either. They didn't really care. I mean, the most they did was give me funny descriptions of what happens, which, yeah. I could honestly go on about why it doesn't make any sense, but I don't want to do that. That is tedious and boring as sin, and I sort of did that. My only thing I can say is, if the story has a hard enough time just explaining even the core concepts of what's going on, I don't even get how the hell you can say this is even a decent story. The damn explanation I had to give requires info that, again, are reports you can miss, which is just terrible story design in general, just to understand certain plot points. And even then, once you even got a cursory glimpse of what's happening, or even a gist, once you examine everything a little closer, it becomes a mess of a plot that makes you wonder what the hell the writer was even thinking. And before somebody says Dark Souls has this sort of plot, no. There is a difference between events happening beforehand that are interesting and create intrigue to maybe figure out, but only give clues to what happened, rather than a plot hiding info so when it begins to do something, it doesn't have to waste time explaining it, but also includes important stuff that should have been explained. My only explanation as to why the plot is so weird is basically the restriction on the plot. Basically, the plot only happens at the beginning and end of an area. That is it. I just hope you understand what I'm saying and what I'm trying to get at. I just cannot care about this plot. It's dumb. I mean, it's trying, but it's so inept in its ability to actually tell it meaningfully that I just stop caring. And I refuse to believe anyone thinks this story is actually genuinely good. And honestly, I don't even understand why it's so complicated. Why not just make the entire plot about the fall of Jack Garland? Simple as that. Instead of the convolutedness about Garland, the Luthinians, and all this multi-universe bullshit, how about just make Garland some pretty decent guy who fell over time into the darkness and his love of battle? Maybe go through the motion in trying to defeat the fiends. However, he begins to enjoy it so much, he became twisted by the darkness. He was in charge of defeating a sort of Anakin Skywalker fall to darkness thing. Someone who became more twisted over the story and only began to just truly enjoy battle, nothing else, hurting his friends for the next fight. I'm kind of spitballing here, but that's my whole issue with this entire game. And really my bigger problem with Square Enix as a whole right now. A lot of time, Square Enix will love to overcomplicate something. And like, people, I don't mind if your plot is complicated, you just need to explain it. Oh, and we might as well talk about this. The DLC is just dull. It's just repeating the game again with higher difficulty and more battles, that's it. And a few jobs, that's it. They don't play all that differently, and they're not interesting enough in my mind. They exist, I guess. So, quick side note for a moment, because I forgot to add this. The reason why I brought up the DLC into the first place was because of, well, its content. You see, in the DLC, they bring up the Moogle. Well, this Moogle in particular. But also, the Emperor from Final Fantasy II, Dissidia. And the game kind of references that Dissidia is a thing. So, I actually originally, before the game came out, theorized that this game was also trying to be a prequel to Dissidia in a certain way, just because of certain natures and elements in it. I mean, like, Shinryu's in the game, and we do fight Golden Shinryu in NT. So, there's that. I'm just bringing that up because it's an interesting aspect, but it's not as interesting as the game thinks it is. I just wanted to reference that because I said I wouldn't reference it, but I forgot to, and here we are. That is it. Back to the ending. closing thoughts and all that. But at the end of the day, Strangers of Paradise is a dull game. The gameplay, while it's good at first, you just realize the cycle, and once you realize the cycle, it becomes more of a spiral where you just want it to end with nothing more than a slog of a story that's dim as the light it searches for. It's just dull.